People often imagine the early Atlantic world as a loose collection of daring traders, risky voyages, and improvised deals struck at the edge of the known world. Yet this familiar picture hides a contradiction that changes everything. Colonies generated astonishing wealth, but remained economically fragile. Empires claimed to promote trade and opportunity, yet enforced strict dependency. The real mystery is not how global commerce began, but who quietly designed its architecture and decided where its profits would ultimately land. To understand that mystery, we must step into the 17th century, a moment when the Atlantic stopped being a frontier and became a system. European powers no longer treated overseas trade as an experiment, but as a strategic necessity. Competition between Britain, Spain, and the Netherlands, and economic survival became inseparable from imperial expansion, naval power, and access to distant resources. This was the age when mercantilism hardened into doctrine. Wealth was measured not by productivity or welfare, but by accumulated bullion. Gold and silver were treated as finite prizes in a zero-sum contest. Under this logic, trade was not meant to be fair or free. It was meant to be controlled, directed, and optimized for the benefit of the state. Colonial trade expanded rapidly during this period, linking the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia through increasingly regular shipping routes. Raw materials flowed out of colonies, manufactured goods flowed back in, and enslaved labor was violently forced into the system to keep it running. These movements appeared chaotic on the surface, but beneath them lay a growing framework of rules, permissions, and restrictions. At the heart of that framework stood chartered companies. These were not ordinary businesses, they were legal hybrids, granted royal charters that gave them monopolies over vast regions, the right to wage war, negotiate treaties, collect taxes, and administer justice. In effect, they became states within states, designed to manage risk while concentrating reward. The origins of these companies were pragmatic. European governments lacked the capital to finance overseas trade and colonization directly. By pooling private investment under state protection, chartered companies allowed empires to expand without bearing all the costs. From the beginning, this arrangement aligned commercial success with imperial ambition. The Dutch East India Company became the most powerful example, issuing shares, paying dividends, and operating a global fleet. The English East India Company followed a similar model, while Atlantic-focused companies like the Royal African Company and the Dutch West India Company targeted trade in enslaved people, sugar, tobacco, and silver. Each company embedded imperial priorities into commercial practice. Shipping routes became arteries of controlled movement. Certain ports were designated as legal entry points, while others were excluded. Colonial merchants were required to ship goods on company-approved vessels, insure them through approved insurers, and sell them in approved markets. Freedom of trade existed, mostly in theory. Silver and gold flows reveal how effective this control was. Vast quantities of silver extracted from mines in the Americas entered global circulation, but rarely lingered in the colonies. Chartered companies and imperial treasuries ensured that bullion moved quickly to Europe, where it financed wars, stabilized currencies, and underwrote further expansion. Plantation economies fit neatly into this structure. Sugar, tobacco, and later cotton required large-scale investment and steady access to credit. Chartered companies and metropolitan banks provided both, but at a price. Colonial producers became locked into debt cycles that ensured profits flowed outward even during periods of high production. As these systems expanded, early banking practices grew more sophisticated. Bills of exchange allowed money to move without metal. Insurance spread risk across investors in Amsterdam or London rather than planters in the Caribbean. Losses were absorbed by those least able to recover, while gains were quietly centralized. This expansion phase created the appearance of shared growth. Ports bustled, shipyards expanded, and trade volumes surged. Colonies seemed prosperous on paper, but the deeper the system grew, the more rigid it became, locking regions into specialized roles they could not easily escape. Strain emerged when external shocks hit. Wars between European powers disrupted shipping lanes, piracy increased costs. Sudden drops in European demand sent prices crashing in colonial markets. These crises revealed how little flexibility colonial economies possessed. Taxation intensified during these moments. Chartered companies were allowed to levy duties, fees, and tolls to maintain operations and protect monopolies. Colonies paid more precisely when revenues fell, reinforcing dependency rather than relieving it. Rather than loosening control in response to crisis, empires tightened it. Trade restrictions increased, monopolies were defended more aggressively, and enforcement grew harsher. The system responded to instability, not with reform, but with consolidation. Failures were often blamed on colonial inefficiency or mismanagement. When plantations collapsed or trade slowed, the narrative focused on local incompetence. Rarely were the structural constraints of company rule and enforced trade acknowledged as the underlying cause. Over time, consolidation reshaped global commerce. Smaller merchants were squeezed out. Larger companies absorbed competitors. Financial power concentrated in imperial capitals, where investors could diversify risk across continents, while colonial producers faced ruin from a single bad season. Boom and bust cycles became a defining feature of the system. Prices rose, investments surged, production expanded, and then markets shifted. Each downturn transferred assets upward, reinforcing the dominance of those who controlled credit and access. These patterns did not end with the 17th century. The architecture built by chartered companies became a template for later global corporations. Separation of ownership from labor, profit from production, and decision-making from consequence became normalized. The uncomfortable truth is that inequality was not an accidental byproduct of early global commerce. It was engineered. Chartered companies were designed to extract value efficiently, shield investors from risk, and align economic outcomes with imperial priorities. Even after formal monopolies dissolved, their logic persisted. Trade routes, financial centers, and legal norms established during this period continued to shape global flows. Regions once locked into extraction struggled to diversify, while former imperial centers retained financial dominance. Modern global trade still reflects these early patterns. Resource-rich nations often face volatility and debt, while financial hubs thrive by managing flows rather than producing goods. The echoes of chartered company rule remain embedded in institutions we now take for granted. What makes this history unsettling is its subtlety. There were no singular moments of theft that could be easily condemned. Wealth moved legally, systematically, and invisibly through structures that appeared orderly and rational. Understanding this past challenges the myth that markets naturally reward efficiency or innovation. It reveals how rules, power, and access shape outcomes long before competition begins. Global commerce was structured, not discovered. The first takeaway is that economic systems are designed. They reflect the priorities of those with the power to write rules, grant privileges, and enforce compliance, often far from the people most affected by them. The second takeaway is that dependency is rarely natural. When regions are locked into specific economic roles, their struggles are predictable outcomes of design, not evidence of failure or lack of effort. The third takeaway is that inequality becomes durable once embedded in economic architecture. Even when political systems change, the pathways of wealth often remain stubbornly intact. The warning hidden in this history is clear. Systems built for control tend to outlast the empires that create them, shaping futures long after their origins are forgotten. Chartered companies did not merely trade goods. They built the secret architecture of global commerce, directing wealth, risk, and power in ways that still shape the modern world. If this story changes how you see the origins of global trade, the real question becomes what structures today quietly determine outcomes we accept as inevitable. History does not end with answers, but with awareness. And awareness, once gained, invites us to look more carefully at the systems we live within and the unseen designs that still guide them.